Welcome to the Romanian River channel, and the first in what I hope will be a long series of light science videos dealing with gaming technologies, wherein I basically take the gaming lore for the respective technology, its depictions within the game, and try and explain it in the real world in some way that actually looks like in the game, functions more or less like in the game, but is actually possible in the real world. Granted, energetic considerations, i.e., how much energy you have to use to actually get something like that, and which directly affects its, how should I put this, its usability in real terms, will be more or less neglected. But you're here more or less to hear like, okay, how's a mass driver gonna work, or how's an ion cannon gonna work, or in the case of this video, how in the bloody hell do we get a Thanix cannon in the real world? In the first part of the video, I'll be dealing with interpreting, as I said, the cannon itself, how it looks in the game, and what parts of the lore and stuff like that can be applied to the real world. And then I'll basically more or less spin out a general design of what I think one would look like in the real world.
Contrary to popular belief, Sovereign's main gun was not a directed energy weapon. Rather, its massive Element Zero core powered an electromagnetic field suspending a liquid iron-uranium-tungsten alloy that shaped into armor-piercing projectiles when fired. The jet of molten metal, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, destroys targets by impact force and irresistible heat. Only 11 months after the battle, the Turians produced the Thanix, their own miniaturized version of Sovereign's gun. The Thanix can fire reliably every 15 seconds, rivaling a cruiser's firepower, but mountable on a fighter or frigate. When subjected to an electrical current, the rare material dubbed Element Zero, or EZO, emits a dark energy field that raises or lowers the mass of all objects within it. Element Zero can increase or decrease the mass of a volume of space-time when subjected to an electrical current. With a positive current, mass is increased. With a negative current, mass is decreased. The stronger the current, the greater the magnitude of the dark energy mass effect.
Right off the bat, we have a pretty big problem with the fact that Element Zero is involved within the weapon. Why? Well, Element Zero in and of itself is physically impossible, not so much due to its physical properties as due to its special property of raising or lowering mass within a given area of space-time. This is pretty much impossible and would violate all known laws of physics, because to be honest, at that point, you could basically get infinite energy by taking, let's say, a 1 kilogram weight, lessening its mass via the mass effect field down to, let's say, a gram, spinning it around really fast, connected to a generator or something like that, turn off the mass effect field, and hey presto, now you have a lot more kinetic energy, which is getting converted into electrical energy via the generator. That is basically infinite energy, more or less, and as I said, completely impossible. The physical properties in and of itself, if you don't mind an absurd amount of mass, you could probably use neutronium, which doesn't even have, as far as I'm aware, electrons within a orbit around the nucleus itself. It's just basically a naked nucleus made up of neutrons, but yeah, at that point, you really don't have any usage for it outside maybe armor plating or something like that. However, going forward, we're gonna look at the cannon's depiction in game and try to get a decent idea of how it behaves and how we can actually replicate that realistically. For about a month, I spent more or less, let's say, a couple of hours each day, either looking at or thinking about the depictions of the Thanix cannon in game. And so far as I've been able to discern, there are two variations, more or less. The first being the one depicted in Mass Effect 2, and the one depicted in Mass Effect 3 being slightly more different by the nature of the projectile itself. In Mass Effect 2, as far as I've seen, the SR2 Normandy fires more or less a beam type projectile with a how should I put this? A rather interesting end structure in the tip of it, so to say. So basically it's the tip, the tail connecting the barrel of the cannon itself. It seems more or less to be a particle weapon of sorts with the initial projectile at the end. Problem is the depiction itself and the way in which it would function in the real world is pretty much dubious, because yes, you're gonna have a lovely head on the projectile itself, but it'll be a pretty unstable trajectory considering the projectile itself will be slowing down versus the beam behind it, which will push upon the projectile. And because the projectile itself doesn't have a definitive form, and it being more or less liquid or semi-liquid at the very least, you're gonna probably push the projectile aside and hit the target with the beam proper. The projectile is described as having a self-sharpening nature, so in and of itself it should be actually more solid than liquid, which poses a bigger problem considering it'll move even slower than the beam itself. So yeah, a lot of problems. In the Mass Effect 3 version, it is a bit more realistic because it's basically depicted as a searing hot mass driver projectile going at a significant portion of the speed of light, which can be anything from 5 to, well, not 5, well, actually a significant portion, basically anything from 1 to 99% in layman's terms. In scientific terms, personally, I'd say a significant portion is anything up to 50%. But the Everest class Mass Effect driver, the Everest class Dreadnought's Mass Effect driver to be precise, accelerated the projectile up to, I believe, 1.5% the speed of light, which means we have a minimum speed up from which the projectile of the Thanix cannon has to be. Problem, however, arises immediately with the fact that accelerating things towards light speed gets prohibitively more expensive in energetic terms the more mass you have. Granted, isn't that bad versus the exponential growth of the energetic requirement for the speed, like for example 1%, not that hard. 5%, oh bloody hell. So basically you'd want a lower mass if possible, which is why, for example, in modern days, when we're talking about particle weapons, they're not talking exactly molecules or atoms, more electrons or subatomic particles of that degree, because it's easier to accelerate them to near light speed that way and get decent amount of negative effect towards the whatever it's hit by the respective particle. So we have more or less our parameters for getting a weapon which not only is destructive in Mass Effect terms, but is superior to the existing option for Dreadnoughts, which is the respective Everest class Mass Effect driver. Keep saying Mass Effect driver. Mass driver. It probably is actually a Mass Effect driver, and that actually boosts up efficiency. It'll probably use, in a similar sense, Mass Effect feels to lighten the projectile, fire it, and then once the projectile exits the barrel and the Mass Effect field of the ship, the projectile becomes heavier and it magically gains more energy. That said, in the real world, in real world terms, to get a superior weapon sufficiently potent enough to justify a investment of the level of sheer material expense seen in Mass Effect 3, i.e. retrofitting fighters, frigates, cruisers, and dreadnoughts with the respective weapon system, I've selected a projectile weight of 4.6 kilograms, which you might ask where is that from? It's basically a 125 millimeter silver bullet weight, and a speed of 2.5% speed of light, which is about, if I'm not mistaken, 7,500 kilometers per second, more or less. Could be wrong, could not be. Possibly we'll fix this and post it, God knows. These values will be explained a bit more in depth in the energetic portion, which will be towards the end of the video itself, just to give you guys more of a idea what type of energies and what type of projectiles these are, per se. The problems with the gun itself, or the cannon more precisely, is the fact that its reliance on the mass effect field to gain a coherent projectile in the initial stages and actually accelerate that damn thing to a significant portion of the speed of light means we're in quite a bit of trouble gaining the coherency or the speed element, because to be honest, the main two schools of thought in terms of particle weapons or plasma weapons, because the Thanix cannon is called a magneto-hydrodynamic gun or cannon, and a magneto-hydrodynamic fluid is basically a plasma, more or less. Now, the problem here is when you're dealing with plasmas, you either have to confine it via magnetic field or via in a sense a coil type array. Otherwise the plasma itself would dissipate rather quickly, because to be honest, the plasma itself has very good radiative properties, and even in the vacuum of space the plasma itself won't lose energy in terms of the amount within the mass of the plasma, but the plasma itself would spread out. Space itself isn't a perfect vacuum. It's not even as good a vacuum as we can get in a prototype fusion reactor, which I know is kind of an interesting factoid, but it's still enough of a vacuum to extinguish most plasmas quite easily. So yeah, dealing with magnetic confinement per se is problematic, because your projectile is in most cases spherical or approximately spherical, and a magnetic field on a sphere, well, not even the Earth has a perfect magnetic field, and well, it's managing to keep us safe for billions upon billions of years. And well, suffice to say, the magnetic field of a spherical plasma will suffer what's called a hairball effect, where you have, how should I put this, magnetic field lines which do not connect with each other, and thus leakages appear in those areas. They're basically topographical defects in the magnetic field, and you lose plasma via that way, which significantly restricts the effective range of any type of weapon that chucks an orb of plasma like that out. The image in the background at the current time is, in a sense, a hairball situation, but precisely it's the Earth in a magnetic pole shift situation, which is closest as I can get in terms of visuals without actually having to do the simulation myself, and personally I don't really have a supercomputer to do it properly, of a magnetic spherical plasma, because that thing would be shifting poles, would be a very, very violent, in terms of magnetic stability, system. Now, besides the whole magnetic confinement bit, as I said, there's also a magnetic confinement option via either firing off the plasma in a canister and letting it melt on contact, which is kind of something the US Army is sort of playing around with, if I'm not mistaken, but it isn't at all similar to a Thanix cannon, which fires a lovely orb of death directly, not fires what appears to be a regular projectile up until it hits something. So I thought for a while, about a week or so, about the general idea of having a magnetic confinement system based around lasers, because a laser in and of itself is a electromagnetic wave. So in theory, if you slave enough lasers around the plasma itself, you can get the Mass Effect 2 type effect with an array of lasers. The problem there is that school of thought rapidly extinguished itself when I did a wee bit of calculations, and it turns out you'd be better served just firing the lasers at the target, because yeah, the plasma will get there, but no guarantees the target will still be in one piece to actually take the plasma. So now we arrive at the problem, because how the hell do you accelerate a glob of plasma sufficiently quickly enough and yet maintain coherency? Well, I thought for a while about possibly using a solid projectile or a semi-solid projectile propelled by a laser type effect, which would kind of give you a tail like you have in Mass Effect 2, but would not give you a projectile in the general shape as you see in Mass Effect 3 with the final battle scene, which is quite visible. In that scene, by the way, basically any projectile that's blue can be assumed to be a Thanix projectile, because as I've seen both within Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect 1 to a small degree, mass drivers using the Mass Effect field effect most likely have more or less a red projectile, and blue kind of is a tip-off, so to say. So that idea with the semi-solid projectile laser doesn't work in and of itself due to the requirement of it being at least visually similar to what we see in game. And again, it's the problem that the laser will push the projectile, but your ship's moving, the projectile is moving, you get the general idea. You might throw the projectile off with the laser. Even in pulse regime, you're not likely to actually propel the projectile fast enough to keep up with the laser, which will probably just blow a hole into the projectile or dissipate most of its energy into the projectile, which doesn't give you a tail and doesn't really heat up the projectile that much. Yeah, I know, a lot of repetitions, but unscripted things. Now, that all aside, I actually had a moment of pure desperation. What was it? About 1 month and a half in, and was like, okay, let's just Google random stuff, random terminology, and see if I can find something that actually kind of would work. And to be honest, I'm a lucky son of a bastard. Now, the image that just cycled in is a image describing schematically what a plasma Wakefield acceleration chamber does, i.e. it takes a bunch of particles, be they positive or negative, and it accelerates them to the point of, at the current time, with the current technology and the current knowledge they have, in a not dense plasma and with electrons, 1 giga-electron volt per meter, which is very, very significant. You could probably get light speed for electrons, but not, let's say, I can't remember exactly the value off the top of my head, but I don't think you need more than a couple of 100 meters worth of these chambers to actually get sped up fast enough. And that's with current technology and current knowledge. That in and of itself would probably make a Thanix type device much bigger, and considering the plasmas we'd have to use to get a dense enough projectile to actually get something usable out the other end, it would probably be a very big chamber. But all things considered, it is possible to take a bunch of iron atoms strip them more or less of electrons completely, spin them up in a initial accelerator, get them focused up, get them into a nice bunch, get enough of them into the bunch to get a nice dense bunch, so to say, and shoot that through a, well, one or multiple, depending on preference, chambers. Considering the Thanix themselves, well, the Thanix itself, pardon, is a iron tungsten uranium alloy projectile, we're probably gonna have several chambers with iron, tungsten, and uranium in that order. Well, actually, it's iron, uranium, and tungsten, if I'm not mistaken, because tungsten is heavier than uranium, to basically speed the projectile up to the desired speed. Yeah, repetition again. It'll also help us get the general composition of the Thanix projectile as described in the lore. So yeah, win-win. The thing is though, once you get that projectile going a significant chunk of the speed of light, in this particular case 2.5%, you want to actually have it stay at that specific speed and stay intact. So for that reason, ideally speaking, you want to actually cool the projectile before it exits the barrel. And before you cool it, you'd want to actually give it a usable shape and not basically what would amount to a long, not that deadly clump of semi-solid matter. So before any sort of guidance or cooling mechanism, you'd want to have a Z-pinch type device at the the aperture between the two devices, so as to get a basically a squeeze on the particle bunch, elongate it, maintain its speed, but have it be a bit more deadly, so to say, because if you get hit with a slab of iron, it'll hurt. If you get hit with the same sort of mass of iron shaped into a dart, yeah, you're gonna be feeling that a hell of a lot more. Once you get through the Z-pinch, which for layman's terms, the Z-pinch is basically a magnetic squeezer, or extruder in more technical terms, you pass into a railgun type device, which only has the general usage of focusing and guiding the now squeezed and more or less shaped projectile towards its target, which more or less will be outside the gun. Because if you take the Z-pinch and extrude it that way, you might actually get a deviation from the trajectory, which is not ideal. So you want to have something continuing on afterwards to guide the projectile more properly. Once that's done and the projectile is cooled, it exits the barrel and goes 2.5% the speed of light at the target. Now, before we end the video, I also promised a small, so to say, energetic portion to the video, just to give you guys a general feel of what the sort of requirements would be and how futuristic this thing is and how unlikely it is to be used in any point in the near future. Because to be honest, from a near future perspective, taking the values I just mentioned in the video, which for the Thanix was 4.6 kilograms, 2.5% speed of light, well, the kinetic force yields are frankly absurd, but just to give you guys a measuring stick, so to say, the Everest class Mass Effect enhanced mass driver, as I said, for the purposes of this video, we assume 20 kilograms, though I believe in the lore it's 38, 1.3% the speed of C, which in this case is completely lore compliant. The yield of one such round would equal to about 387.1 kilotons, or 0.3871 megatons, or 0.0003871 gigatons. When I go the megaton and gigaton range, well, the Thanix, by comparison, as I stated, 4.6, 2.5, the yield is 30 gigatons with one round. Now the problem here is these numbers are completely checked out there for the sake of checking out there. The difference, even with a lighter round, is due to the fact that kinetic force, for anybody who isn't aware or forgot their high school level education in physics, basically square grows exponentially with speed and linearly with mass. So losing, what is it, 75% of the mass in exchange for nearly doubling the speed, well, as you can clearly see, it does not have much of a difference. In fact, it's completely the other way. Problem here is these energies, both for the Everest and the Thanix. To be perfectly honest, we're gonna take the ideal situation where what you get out is what you need to put in, which is completely unrealistic even for Mass Effect. For the Everest itself, the ideal efficiency for mass drivers, assuming no tomfoolery with Mass Effect fields, but even with that, you do lose energy via the magnetic effect, the induction of the magnetic acceleration, so to say. Even that, you'll still have a 33% efficiency. The Thanix has a efficiency of between 30 and 50%. This is the efficiency of the Wakefield accelerators themselves, because most of the other energy used in the Z-pinch and the mass driver rail, so to say, are minimal by comparison. So, just doing the numbers in my mind, the Everest would require around a megaton to get the energy required to pump out one nearly 400 kiloton warhead. Not really ideal. The Thanix, oh boy, if we take the lower end yield, it would need 90 gigatons, which is 90,000 times more than the Everest. And even with the ideal situation, it's still 6,000 times and change, 60,000 times and change, pardon. So yeah, the energies are beyond absurd, but with the Thanix itself, you can just tweak the speed downward ever so slightly and get more practical energy requirements, because the Everest might sound absurd, but 1 megaton, it's not that much energy per total, but when you're dealing with thousands of megatons worth of energy, you're already well past the nuclear weapon, i.e. a fusion bomb stage, and you're already looking towards probably significant antimatter detonations to actually get that yield. I mean, to be honest, the 30 gigaton range is probably a mass extinction grade event. To put it another way, in Mass Effect lore, there's that ancient canon, one of the doomed races from before, from one of the previous cycles, used to kill a Reaper. Bigger than that, most likely, because that crater isn't that big, considering 30 kiloton detonation. Damn. And I mean, for an asteroid, that wouldn't be that much, because the asteroid itself doesn't really have that much penetrative power. But think of it this way: this is a 4.6 kilogram slug, more or less, shaped into a dart. That thing's gonna blow a really big hole into a planet, considering its sheer likelihood that thing will penetrate and deposit its energy far deeper down than a regular asteroid would. I'm not too sure it wouldn't even crack a planet. Overall, the Thanix going with more crazy energies is absurd. More than likely in the lore it's lower yield, but yeah, as I said, this is just more a exercise in gauging why. In Mass Effect, for example, the races chose to actually go with this option. Oh, and as a final note, these two are ideal efficiencies. Both have one massive problem. Both would require energy storage devices, and even the storage devices used on the current prototype fusion reactors don't really have 80%, more than 80% efficiency. If I'm not mistaken, they were called flywheel generators. Basically, they retain the energy in kinetic form and thus don't lose any via the Joule effect or via the electrochemical effect with more traditional batteries or capacitors or stuff like that. So yeah, imagine tacking on another 6 to 7% efficiency loss on top of that, and yeah, things start to spiral a wee bit more. In any case, if you guys made it to this point, thanks for listening to my rather huge amount of waffling, and hopefully you found this thing more or less interesting, because for me personally, it's been an interesting trip. Thank you for watching, or more precisely surviving up until this point, because gods know the editing's kinda interesting and my voice has a melodic tone to it. If you like what you saw, feel free to hit the subscribe button, like button. It does help out the statistics of the channel, gets more visible, you know, stuff like that. And to be honest, at one point I would like to actually make this a job so I can do better content with better quality, more games, more coverage, you know, stuff like that. Take care.